I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest. The river had been talking to us for almost a week before anyone died. 6 days. That's what we had. 6 days of warnings carried downstream on brown water. And we did what people always do with warnings. We explained them away, laughed nervously, and went back to our routines. My name is Marcus Dunhill. I was 34 years old and working as a civil engineer for the County Water Authority in Harlan Falls, a town of 6,000 people built along the eastern fork of the Cahaba River. My job was infrastructure: pipes, drainage, flood prevention. I spent my days reading flow charts and my evenings on the back porch watching the river move past my property like a long, slow muscle. I knew that river. I knew its moods, its seasonal patterns, the way it swelled after storms and retreated in August heat. I knew it the way you know a neighbor you've lived beside for a decade. So when things started appearing in the current on that Monday morning, day 6 before everything collapsed, I noticed immediately. It was Elena who pointed it out first. Elena Vasquez, my colleague at the Water Authority, was standing at the monitoring station upstream of the Route 9 bridge when she called me. Her voice had that particular tightness that meant something was wrong, but she hadn't decided how wrong yet. "Marcus, you need to come see this. The river's carrying something." I drove out in my county truck, coffee still warm in the cup holder. Elena was standing at the concrete lip of the monitoring platform, her dark hair pulled back, clipboard forgotten at her side. She pointed downstream without looking at me. I saw it immediately. Debris in the current, but not storm debris. Not branches or trash or the usual agricultural runoff. There were dead animals. 3 deer that I could count, bloated and rotating slowly in the brown water. A dog, medium-sized, its collar still visible. And between them, something I couldn't identify at first. Masses of tissue, pink and gray, formless. "Those deer aren't decomposed enough to be old kills," Elena said. "They look fresh, maybe 2 days dead." "Could be a chemical spill upstream," I said, already reaching for my phone to call the regional office. "Fayette County had that fertilizer issue last spring." "Marcus." Elena grabbed my wrist. Her fingers were cold despite the morning warmth. "Look at the deer. Look at what's wrong with them." I leaned over the railing. The nearest deer carcass rotated in an eddy near the bank, close enough to see clearly. Its abdomen was torn open, not from bloating, not from scavengers. The wounds were ragged, irregular, concentrated around the throat and shoulders. Deep gouges in the hide, and the eyes. The eyes were gone, but not pecked out by birds. The sockets looked crushed inward. "Something attacked them," I said. "Something attacked all of them. Same way, same wounds." I called our supervisor, Dan Oberlin, a man 3 years from retirement who treated every anomaly as a paperwork inconvenience. He told me to collect water samples, file an incident report, and contact Fish and Wildlife. Standard protocol. I did all of those things that Monday, and by Tuesday morning there were 9 more animal carcasses in the river. By Wednesday, 14. The water samples came back showing elevated cortisol levels in the tissue, stress hormones through the roof, and something else the lab flagged but couldn't immediately identify. A protein compound they'd never cataloged. Elena and I stood at that monitoring station every morning that week, watching the river deliver its messages. Each day, the cargo grew stranger, more disturbing, harder to rationalize. And each day, the town behind us continued its ordinary life. The elementary school ran its spring carnival. Their hardware store held its annual sale. People mowed their lawns and argued about parking and planned weekend barbecues. 6 days. The river was screaming at us for 6 days. and we filed reports. I'm telling you this from a room I won't describe, in a place I won't name, 43 days after Harlan Falls became a graveyard. I'm telling you because someone needs to know what warnings look like when they arrive. Tuesday, day 5. Elena and I collected samples from 3 separate points along the river. The protocol was simple. Upstream, midpoint, downstream. Label everything. Maintain chain of custody. We'd done it dozens of times for routine water quality checks. But this time, Elena brought a cooler with extra ice packs and nitrile gloves that went up to her elbows. She wasn't treating this like routine. The river was running slightly higher than normal for late April. Snowmelt season was ending in the mountains to the north, and rainfall had been average. Nothing in the hydrology explained what was coming downstream. I kept thinking about that. About how the numbers on my flow charts looked perfectly ordinary, while the water itself carried evidence of something catastrophic happening upstream. We met Reggie Falk that morning. Reggie owned a fishing operation about 2 miles north of town, guided trips for tourists, a small bait shop, kayak rentals. He was standing on his dock when we pulled up in the county truck, and he looked like a man who hadn't slept. "You all seen what's in the water?" he said before we'd even closed our doors. "We're collecting samples," I said. "We reported it yesterday." "Reported it?" Reggie repeated the words like they tasted sour. "I pulled a deer out of my boat slip this morning. Half a deer, the back half. Something tore it apart, Marcus. Not a bear. I've seen bear kills. This was..." He stopped, looked at the river, then back at us. "My dogs won't go near the bank. Haven't since Sunday night. They stand at the tree line and whine." Elena was already walking toward the water's edge with her collection kit. I stayed with Reggie because I could see he needed to talk to someone official, someone who represented the idea that authorities had things under control. "Have you been upstream at all?" I asked. "Went up about 5 miles yesterday afternoon in my flat bottom, looking for where this mess is coming from." He pulled off his cap, ran a hand through thinning gray hair. "The smell hits you around mile 3, like copper and rot. And the birds are gone, Marcus. I mean gone. No herons, no kingfishers, nothing on the banks. 5 miles of river without a single bird." That detail stuck with me. I'd noticed the morning had been quiet at the monitoring station, but I'd attributed it to the overcast sky. Now I thought about it differently. "Did you see anything alive up there? Anything that could be causing the kills?" Reggie put his cap back on and looked at me with an expression I'd later recognize as the face of someone who's seen something they can't process. "I saw movement on the north bank around mile 4. In the tree line. I thought it was a person at first, upright, moving through brush. But it was wrong. The movement was wrong. Jerky, like it couldn't coordinate. I called out, thought maybe someone was hurt. It stopped and turned toward the sound of my voice. And I left. Hit the throttle and came back downstream. I don't know why. Just felt wrong in my gut. Felt like prey. I wrote it in my notes. Possible injured person spotted upstream, approximately 4 miles north. I intended to pass it to the sheriff's office. I did pass it to the sheriff's office. Deputy Catherine Marsh took the report and said she'd send someone to check the trail access points. She never did. She had other calls that day. A domestic disturbance, a fender bender on Route 9, a shoplifting report at the pharmacy. Normal things. Important things that happened in the normal world that still existed on Tuesday. Elena finished her collection and came back to the truck with her cooler sealed tight. She was pale. "There's tissue in the shallows," she said quietly. "Human tissue, Marcus. I'm almost certain. I looked at her and felt the ground shift beneath my understanding of what was happening. I asked if she was sure. She said she'd taken pre-med before switching to environmental science. She knew what human muscle fiber looked like. We drove back to the office in silence. Dan Oberlin didn't want to hear it. I say that without anger now. At the time, I was furious. But looking back, I understand. Dan was a bureaucrat. His entire career had been built on the principle that systems work, that protocols exist for reasons, and that escalation happens through proper channels. When Elena and I sat in his office on Tuesday afternoon and told him we suspected human remains in the river, he went through the stages you'd expect. First, he asked if we were certain. We said almost certain. He latched onto the almost like a drowning man grabbing driftwood. Then he asked about contamination of the sample. Could it be animal tissue, misidentified? Elena explained her reasoning calmly, clinically. Dan looked at the ceiling, then at his computer screen, then at the framed photo of his boat on Lake Martin. "I'll contact the state lab," he said finally. "Rush the analysis. In the meantime, we issue an advisory. No recreational use of the river until we get clarity. Precautionary. We don't say why specifically." "Dan," I said, "if there are human remains coming downstream, that's a law enforcement issue. That's not a water quality advisory. And if we call the sheriff and tell them we found human body parts in the river based on a visual assessment, and it turns out to be deer tissue, we look like idiots, and this office loses credibility for the next decade." He leaned forward. "Let the lab confirm. Then we escalate. 2 days, maybe 3. We didn't have 2 days, but we didn't know that yet. I called my sister that night. Grace lived in Birmingham, worked in marketing for a healthcare company, and served as my primary reality check whenever I needed one. I told her about the animals, the tissue, Reggie's story. I could hear her concern sharpen through the phone. "Marcus, this sounds serious. Have you called anyone beyond your office?" "Dan wants to wait for lab confirmation." "Since when do you do what Dan wants?" She was right, but there was a complication. I'd been with the Water Authority for 7 years. I'd built a reputation as reliable, measured, not prone to alarm. If I went over Dan's head and the tissue turned out to be animal, I'd be the guy who cried wolf. In a town like Harlan Falls, that reputation would follow me to my grave. So I compromised with myself. I called Deputy Marsh again, told her about the tissue samples without using the word human. I said we'd found biological material inconsistent with normal river fauna and recommended she contact state police as a precaution. She said she'd note it. I could hear the disinterest in her voice. Another oddity from the river, another box to check. Wednesday morning, day 4. I woke at dawn and walked to my back porch. The river behind my property ran about 100 yards from the house, visible through a thin line of willows. In the gray pre-dawn light, I could see shapes in the water. More carcasses. The current had delivered them overnight like offerings. But it was the sound that stopped me. Or rather, the absence of sound. Grace's old house in the suburbs had always been noisy with birds at dawn. Cardinals, mockingbirds, the aggressive chatter of starlings. My property had been the same. Every morning for 10 years, a chorus. That Wednesday, nothing. Absolute silence except the water itself, moving south with its terrible cargo. I stood on that porch in my boxers and a t-shirt, coffee growing cold in my hand, and felt something I can only describe as primal recognition. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of a forest when a predator moves through it. Every living thing holding still, holding its breath, waiting for the danger to pass. The danger wasn't passing. It was coming downstream toward us, carried by the same water that had built our town, sustained our livelihoods, and given us the false comfort of thinking we understood the world we lived in. I went inside and packed a go-bag. I couldn't have explained why. Instinct, something older than reason telling me to prepare. Wednesday afternoon brought Dr. Lena Okafor to Harlan Falls. She arrived in a state vehicle with plates I didn't recognize. Not Alabama, not any adjacent state. She appeared at the Water Authority office without appointment, showed credentials from what she called the Southeastern Epidemiological Response Unit, and asked to see our samples and reports. I'd never heard of her agency. Neither had Dan. But her credentials looked real, her questions were precise, and she had an authority about her that made Dan straighten his tie and offer his best chair. She was tall, mid-40s, with close-cropped natural hair and eyes that moved across documents like scanners. She read our reports in minutes, asked 3 questions about collection methodology, and then turned to me with the first genuine urgency I'd seen from anyone official. Mr. Dunhill, you noted elevated cortisol and an unidentified protein compound. Did the lab provide any spectral analysis? They flagged it for further study. We're waiting on results. Don't wait. She pulled a phone from her jacket and made a call, speaking in clipped technical language I only half followed. Something about prion-adjacent proteins, neural tissue degradation markers, timeline acceleration. When she hung up, she looked at Dan. Mr. Oberlin, I need you to issue an immediate order. No river access, not advisory, mandatory. No swimming, no fishing, no boating. And I need it done within the hour. Dan blinked. On what authority? Mine. She set a document on his desk. I caught a glimpse of federal letterhead, multiple signatures. This supersedes your local authority on matters of public health emergency. I'm not asking. Dan issued the order. He didn't like it, but he did it. 20 minutes later, the county's alert system sent texts to every registered phone. Mandatory river closure. No water contact permitted until further notice, by order of Harlan County Water Authority. After Dan left to manage the phones, which immediately started ringing, I found Dr. Okafor on the monitoring platform, staring at the river with binoculars. You've seen this before, I said. It wasn't a question. She lowered the binoculars. Not exactly this, but patterns. 3 weeks ago, a river in eastern Tennessee started carrying dead livestock. 2 weeks ago, a creek system in northern Georgia showed the same protein markers in water samples. The timeline is accelerating. Timeline of what? She looked at me, and I saw the calculation in her expression. How much to reveal? How much would help versus how much would cause panic? There's a pathogen moving through fauna in the Appalachian watershed. It affects neural tissue, causes hyperaggression, loss of motor coordination, eventual systemic failure. In animals, death occurs within 72 hours of infection. The bodies end up in waterways. And in humans? The pause before her answer lasted long enough for my stomach to drop. We don't have confirmed human cases. The tissue your colleague identified, if it is human, would be the first evidence of cross-species transmission. I thought of Reggie's figure in the tree line. Jerky movement, couldn't coordinate. Turned towards sound. Dr. Okafor, a local resident, reported seeing someone upstream, moving erratically. This was yesterday. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes went cold. She asked for details. I told her everything Reggie had said. She made another call, this one shorter, more urgent. I heard her say the words, possible ambulatory case, and accelerate the response team. How long? I asked when she hung up. If this is what you think it is, how long before it reaches the town? The infections we've tracked move through animal populations at roughly 8 to 12 miles per day. Your upstream source appears to be approximately 15 to 20 miles north, based on decomposition rates of the carcasses. She did the math visibly. If the pattern holds, the infected zone reaches your town's periphery within 3 to 4 days. 3 to 4 days. She told me that on Wednesday. She was wrong. It was faster than that. I called Elena that evening and told her everything Dr. Okafor had shared. Elena listened without interrupting, one of her qualities I'd always appreciated. And when I finished, she asked the only question that mattered. What do we do? Not what does the government do, not what's the protocol. What do we do? Elena had grown up in a family that fled Venezuela in 2014. She understood, in a cellular way, that institutions could fail, that waiting for systems to save you could get you killed. Pack your things, I said. Important documents, medicine, food, water. Be ready to leave by Friday if this gets worse. You think it will? I think the river doesn't lie. Thursday, day 3, started with a phone call from Reggie Falk at 5 in the morning. His voice was stripped raw. Marcus, something came out of the river. I was already pulling on boots. What do you mean came out? I heard my dogs going crazy around 2 a.m. That panicked bark they do. I got my rifle and went to the porch. The security light on the dock was on, and I could see something on the bank, standing in the shallows. A person. It had been a person. Marcus, it was... His breath hitched. It was a woman, or what was left of one. She was standing in the water, up to her shins, facing my property. Not moving, just standing there. Did you call 911? I called. They sent Deputy Marsh. By the time she arrived 40 minutes later, the woman was gone. Back into the water or into the woods, I don't know. But Marcus, the smell, even from 50 yards, like rotten copper. I drove to Reggie's property as the sun came up. He was on his porch with his rifle across his knees, his 2 hounds locked inside the house. I could hear them scratching at the door, whining. We walked to the riverbank together. The ground at the shallows showed disturbance. Footprints in the mud, irregular and deep, as if the person had been stamping or struggling for balance. And there was something else, a brownish residue on the rocks at the water's edge. It looked like dried blood, but darker, almost black in the morning light. That's not normal blood, I said. No, Reggie agreed. It isn't. I photographed everything. Then I called Dr. Okafor at the number she'd given me. She answered on the first ring, which told me she hadn't been sleeping either. I need you to get to my location, I said, and gave her Reggie's address. We have footprints, physical evidence of an infected individual leaving the water and approaching residential property. She arrived within 20 minutes. That speed meant she was already in town, already monitoring, already prepared for this escalation. She studied the footprints, collected the residue with a kit she pulled from her vehicle, and then turned to Reggie. Mr. Falk, I need you to describe exactly what you saw. Every detail you can remember. Reggie repeated his account. Dr. Okafor pressed for specifics. Skin coloration, movement pattern, any vocalizations. Reggie said the woman's skin had appeared mottled, gray, and dark purple in patches. She hadn't moved while he watched. Maybe 10 minutes. No sound. But she'd been oriented toward the house, toward the lights and the noise of the dogs. Attracted to stimuli, Dr. Okafor murmured, writing. Auditory and possibly visual. Doc, Reggie said, his voice hard, what the hell is this? She looked at him with something close to respect. The respect you give someone who deserves honesty. A neurological infection of unknown origin. It destroys higher brain function while preserving motor capability and basic predatory instinct. The infected are not dead, Mr. Falk. Their brain damaged beyond recovery, operating on the most primitive neural pathways humans possess. Reggie absorbed this with the steady gaze of a man who'd survived Vietnam. Then he said, "So they hunt." Dr. Okafor nodded once. "They hunt." I felt the morning air against my skin like ice water. Behind us, the river continued its southward flow, and in its current, more shapes drifted past. The warnings were over. What came next was the thing itself. Thursday afternoon, I convened an unofficial meeting. I couldn't use my authority at the water office. Dan had already told me to stay in my lane, so I used my personal connections. Elena came, along with her husband Miguel, who taught biology at the community college. Reggie drove in from his property, rifle still in his truck. I invited Deputy Marsh, hoping official law enforcement might add legitimacy to what I feared was coming. She declined. "Too busy," she said. "Reports to file about the river closure?" We met at my house. 4 people around my kitchen table with coffee and a growing sense that the world outside was changing faster than anyone wanted to admit. I laid out everything. The timeline of river evidence. Dr. Okafor's information about the pathogen. Reggie's sighting. The protein markers. The silence of the birds. The footprints at the water's edge. Miguel asked scientific questions. How was it transmitted? Were the waterways a vector, or just a disposal route for infected carcasses? Could airborne transmission occur? I didn't have answers to most of these, but I relayed what Okafor had told me. Waterway contamination was the primary concern, which was why the river closure had been issued. Direct transmission appeared to require fluid contact, bite, scratch, or mucous membrane exposure. So like rabies, Miguel said. Faster than rabies, and it preserves mobility. Elena leaned forward. "Marcus, what's the official response? Where's the National Guard? The CDC?" Okafor says they're mobilizing, but the infection corridor runs from eastern Tennessee through northern Georgia and now into Alabama. That's a huge geographic area. Resources are spread thin. That's bureaucratic language for "we're on our own," Reggie said flatly. He wasn't wrong. I'd seen Okafor's face when she talked about the response timeline. There was a gap between what she hoped would arrive and what she believed would arrive. That gap was where people died. We made plans, practical ones. Elena and Miguel would consolidate supplies from their home and mine. Food, water, medical supplies, tools. Reggie would bring his firearms and his expertise. He'd spent decades in the outdoors and knew the terrain around Harlan Falls better than anyone alive. I would maintain contact with Okafor, push for information, and monitor the river for any further escalation. We also made a harder decision. We would tell select neighbors, not everyone. Panic would spread faster than the infection. But people we trusted, people with skills, with calm dispositions, with resources. We'd build a network before we needed one. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood on my back porch at midnight, listening. The river was a dark ribbon through the willows, its surface catching fragments of moonlight. I strained for any sound. Splashing, movement, the sound of something pulling itself from the water. Nothing, just the current. But I noticed something else. Upstream, toward the mountains, the sky held a faint orange glow. Not sunrise, it was midnight, and the glow was in the wrong quadrant. Fire. Something burning in the hills to the north. A farmhouse, a barn, a vehicle. Some structure that held people's lives inside it, now producing light visible from 20 miles away. I took a photograph with my phone. The glow was faint, barely distinguishable from light pollution. But Harlan Falls didn't have light pollution in that direction. Nothing was up there except forest, scattered farms, and the river's source tributaries. Something was happening upstream. Something was burning. I went inside, locked every door, checked every window. Then I sat in my kitchen with my phone and typed a message to our group. Elena, Miguel, Reggie. Orange glow visible north-northwest. Possible structure fire in the upstream corridor. Recommend we accelerate our timeline. Whatever is coming down the river, the people up there are already dealing with it. 3 responses came within minutes. Everyone was awake. Nobody was sleeping well anymore. Reggie's reply was the shortest. Tomorrow we fortify. No more waiting. I agreed. The waiting had ended. Friday morning, day 2, I woke to my phone vibrating continuously. 17 messages in our group thread. Elena had driven past the elementary school at 6 a.m. and seen something that changed everything. A military convoy parked in the lot. 3 vehicles, olive drab, with personnel in hazmat-adjacent gear setting up what appeared to be a communications array on the school roof. No announcement, no public notification, just sudden military presence at dawn on a Friday. I drove there immediately. The school was closed. Spring break had started, which I now realized was probably not a coincidence. The soldiers, if that's what they were, had blocked the parking lot entrance with barriers. A woman in a fitted gray uniform approached my truck when I pulled up. "Sir, this area is restricted. Please turn around." "I'm Marcus Dunhill, County Water Authority. Dr. Lena Okafor has been coordinating with my office. I need to speak with her." The woman's expression shifted slightly, recognition of the name, if not mine. She spoke into a radio, waited, then waved me through. Dr. Okafor was inside the school gymnasium, which had been transformed overnight into something between a command post and a field hospital. Tables with laptops, maps pinned to rolling whiteboards, a section of cots against one wall. She looked like she hadn't slept, but her energy was focused, sharp. "Mr. Dunhill, I was going to call you this morning. What happened?" She led me to a map. The Cahaba River was marked in blue, with red dots along its length. The dots were concentrated upstream, but 3 new ones sat within 5 miles of Harlan Falls. Overnight, we received reports of 3 separate encounters. A farming family at the Coldwater Creek Junction reported an individual attempting to enter their home at approximately 1 a.m. They barricaded and called 911. By the time responders arrived, the individual had moved on. A second sighting near the Route 4 bridge. 2 figures on the road, unresponsive to verbal commands, approaching a stopped vehicle. The driver fled. Third sighting was a trail camera on Harkness property. Recorded 40 seconds of footage showing a figure moving through woods toward the river. So they're here. They're arriving. The infected move slowly but continuously. They don't rest. They follow water sources and respond to stimuli, light, sound, movement. Our models suggest anywhere from 12 to 40 individuals may be in the peripheral zone around your town. 12 to 40. The number hung in the air like smoke. "What's your plan?" I asked. Containment and evacuation. We're recommending the county issue a voluntary evacuation order for properties within 1 mile of the river, mandatory for properties directly on the waterfront. She looked at me. That includes yours. When? The order goes out at noon. We're establishing a safe corridor south along Route 9. Evacuation center in Centerville, 30 miles south. And if people don't leave? We can't force them. Voluntary means voluntary. But Mr. Dunhill. She stepped closer, lowered her voice. The infection corridor is moving faster than our models predicted. The 14-mile buffer we thought we had 2 days ago is now less than 5. If there's a population surge, a group of infected rather than scattered individuals, we won't be able to secure this town. I thought of my neighbors, the Hendersons with their 3 kids, old Mrs. Campanella who couldn't drive, the Reeves family who just moved in last month. I'll help spread the word, I said. Do it fast. And Marcus. She used my first name for the first time. Be packed and ready yourself. If the order upgrades to mandatory, you won't have time to prepare. I left the gymnasium feeling like a man walking through a dream that was about to become a nightmare. The morning sun was warm on my face. Birds were singing somewhere distant, south of town, away from the river. Everything looked normal. The streets were clean, the traffic lights cycled green, yellow, red. A woman jogged past with earbuds in. But I knew what was in those woods. I knew what the river had been telling us. I drove home and started making calls. The evacuation advisory hit phones at 11:47 a.m. Within an hour, Harlan Falls split into 2 populations, those who took it seriously and those who didn't. The divide ran roughly along predictable lines. Families with young children packed immediately, while older residents, lifelong locals, and those with livestock or property they couldn't abandon, dug in their heels. I spent the afternoon going door to door on my street. River Road. The name now carried an irony that tasted like ash. 8 houses between mine and the Route 9 junction. I knew everyone. The Hendersons were already loading their minivan when I arrived. Tom Henderson, a quiet accountant, was moving with efficient urgency. His wife Rachel had the children, ages 4, 7, and 9, buckled in and distracted with tablets. "You coming south, Marcus?" Tom asked. "Not yet. I'm coordinating with the response team. But you're doing the right thing. Don't stop until Centerville." He shook my hand. I noticed the tremble in his grip. They pulled out 5 minutes later, and I watched them go, feeling a strange grief. The street was already changing, becoming something emptier, something exposed. Mrs. Campanella was my next stop. 83 years old, lived alone since her husband Frank passed in 2019. She answered the door in her housecoat, confused by the alert on her phone. "Marcus, what is this nonsense? I'm not going anywhere." I explained as gently as I could. Water contamination, potential health threat, precautionary measure. I didn't say the words infected or pathogen or hunt. She didn't need the full picture. She needed to move. "My daughter's in Tuscaloosa," she said. "That's too far." "Centerville is closer. They have a shelter set up. I can drive you." It took 20 minutes of patient conversation, but she agreed. I loaded a small suitcase and her cat carrier into my truck and drove her to the evacuation staging point at the community center. There were already 50 people there. A bus was loading for the trip south. I got Mrs. Campanella situated with a volunteer and drove back. The street was emptier when I returned. The Hendersons gone. 2 other houses dark and locked. But the Kesslers, Nathan and Deb, were on their porch, arms crossed. watching the activity with visible skepticism. Nathan called out when I passed. "Dunhill, what's the real story here?" I pulled into their driveway. Nathan was 45, ran an auto repair shop, kept a garden and 3 chickens. Deb was a nurse at the county clinic. They were sensible people, not conspiracy thinkers, just stubborn about their home. "Nathan, I need you to listen. I've seen things this week I can't fully explain yet. There's something in the woods coming from upstream. It's aggressive, and it's moving toward the town. The military is here. That's not normal. Please take Deb and go south." He studied my face. Nathan had known me for years, knew I wasn't an alarmist, knew I measured my words. "What kind of something?" "Infected people, brain damaged, aggressive. I don't know exactly what or how, nobody does yet, but they've been spotted within 5 miles of here." Deb stepped forward. "I heard something at the clinic today. Dr. Friedman got a call from the state health department. She looked white as a sheet after. Canceled all afternoon appointments." "What did she hear?" I asked. She wouldn't say, but she left early and told the staff to go home. Nathan and Deb exchanged a look, the look of a couple who'd been together long enough to communicate entire conversations without words. "Give us an hour," Nathan said. "We'll pack and head to Deb's mother in Selma." "Don't take the hour. Take 30 minutes. He nodded slowly. I left them packing and drove back to my house. Elena and Miguel were there, having moved their supplies as planned. Reggie arrived 10 minutes later with a truck bed full of gear: guns, ammunition, camping equipment, fuel cans. We were staying. I knew it then, looking at the 4 of us in my kitchen. We weren't leaving Harlan Falls. Not yet. We had to see what was coming. We had to understand it. We had to warn whoever wouldn't listen. That decision would cost us more than I knew. Friday night, day 2. The last full night before the outbreak breached the town's perimeter. We established a watch rotation. Reggie took first shift, 9 to midnight, positioned on my second-floor balcony with his scoped rifle and a pair of night vision binoculars he'd owned since his hunting days. Elena took midnight to 3. I took 3 to dawn. Miguel served as our communications monitor, keeping his phone charged and tracking the group chats, the official alerts, and a scanner app that picked up emergency radio frequencies. At 10:14 p.m., Reggie called down from the balcony. His voice was flat, controlled, which frightened me more than shouting would have. "Marcus, come up here. Bring the binoculars." I climbed the stairs 2 at a time. Reggie was at the railing, pointing northwest, toward the tree line that separated my property from the Milford Conservation Area, dense mixed forest that ran for miles alongside the river. Third cluster of willows from the left, at the base. I raised the binoculars. Night vision cut the world into shades of green, and it took me a moment to find what he was seeing. Then I did. A figure, standing at the edge of the tree line, perhaps 200 yards from my property boundary. Motionless, facing our direction, toward the house lights. "How long?" I whispered. "Appeared about 6 minutes ago. Came out of the trees, walked to that spot and stopped." I watched for a full minute. The figure didn't move, didn't shift weight, didn't turn its head. It stood with the terrible stillness of something that no longer needed to breathe consciously. "Can you see details?" "Male, tall, maybe 6'2", wearing what looks like work clothes. Jeans, dark shirt. Can't see the face clearly at this distance." We watched together for another 10 minutes. The figure remained motionless. Then, and this was the detail that planted ice in my marrow, it took a single step forward. Just one. Deliberate, slow, oriented precisely toward my house. "It's responding to the lights," I said. "Cut them?" I thought about it. If we went dark, would it lose interest? Or would it continue on the trajectory it had already chosen? Dr. Okafor had said they responded to stimuli, but also moved continuously regardless. "Kill the porch lights. Leave the interior dim. Let's see what happens." Reggie radioed Elena, who hit the exterior switches. The property went dark, except for a faint glow from the kitchen window, where Miguel was monitoring his laptop. The figure stopped. For 5 minutes, I counted, absolute stillness. Then it turned. Not smoothly, not like a person deciding to walk away. It rotated in a jerky quarter turn, paused, then another quarter turn, as if recalibrating. Then it walked back into the trees, with that uncoordinated gait Reggie had described from his earlier sighting. I exhaled. Elena's voice came over the radio. "Is it gone?" "For now," Reggie said. He looked at me in the green-tinged darkness. "That's one," Okafor said, 12 to 40. "I know. Marcus, this house isn't defensible. Single story except this balcony. Windows on all sides. The tree line's too close." He was right. My home, the place I'd lived for 10 years, where I'd built a life and a routine and an identity, was a liability now. Walls of glass and drywall that would stop nothing determined to get through. "We moved to the Water Authority building at dawn," I said. The decision formed as I spoke it. Concrete construction. Single point of entry on the ground floor. Roof access, backup generator. And it's away from the river, south side of town. Reggie nodded. "Good. That's good thinking." We didn't sleep that night. None of us. We sat in the darkened kitchen with the windows covered, listening to the silence outside, knowing that somewhere in those woods, things that had once been people were moving through the darkness with a hunger they couldn't name and we couldn't stop. At 4:17 a.m., the emergency scanner crackled with a transmission that would end any remaining doubt. "All units. 1071, shots fired, Coldwater Creek Road. Multiple aggressors. Non-responsive to commands. Requesting immediate backup. They're everywhere out here." The channel went silent after that. It never came back. Saturday. Day 1. The last day Harlan Falls existed as a town. We moved at first light. I drove my truck with Elena. Reggie followed with Miguel in his vehicle. Supplies, weapons, and fuel distributed between both. The streets were eerily quiet. Half the town had evacuated Friday. Of those who remained, most were sealed inside their homes, watching the news, which had finally caught up to what we already knew. The national coverage was still calling it an unexplained outbreak, with potential neurological symptoms. Still using the careful language of institutions, trying not to trigger panic while the building burned around them. I turned off the radio. The Water Authority building was a squat concrete structure on Oak Street, designed in the 1970s with the paranoid solidity of Cold War-era civic architecture. 2 stories, flat roof, small windows, a single main entrance with a steel security door. The second entrance, a loading dock at the rear, could be secured with a rolling metal gate. I had keys to everything. We unloaded in 20 minutes, established the second floor as living quarters. The break room had a kitchenette, running water from the municipal system, and enough floor space for sleeping bags. The roof became our observation post. From there, we could see the river to the north, the town center to the west, and Route 9 stretching south toward safety we weren't sure still existed. Elena set up a communications station. Miguel organized supplies. We had food for roughly 10 days if we rationed carefully. Reggie positioned weapons at strategic points and mapped sight lines from every window. By 8 a.m., we had a functional base. By 9, we had company. A knock at the steel door, frantic, repeated. I checked the security camera we'd powered on. A young man, maybe 25, with a bleeding gash across his forehead. Behind him, a woman carrying a toddler. I opened the door. They fell inside like people escaping a fire. Thank God, the man was gasping. We saw the trucks outside. Thought maybe, I'm Jonah. This is my wife Keisha, our daughter Maya. What happened? Elena was already examining the gash on his head. They came through Birchwood Circle, 3 of them, maybe 4. We were loading our car to evacuate, and they came out of nowhere. One grabbed our neighbor Phil. Phil was... Jonah's voice broke. They were biting him, tearing at him. I grabbed Keisha and Maya and we ran. Keisha was silent, holding Maya against her chest with a fierce compression of absolute terror. The child was quiet, too quiet for a toddler. Shock. Were you bitten? I had to ask. Any fluid contact? Jonah shook his head. The cuts from a fence. We climbed the Peterson's chain link to get away. I let them in. Reggie took position at the door, scanning the street outside. Clear, no pursuit. But the morning air carried something new, a distant sound I initially mistook for a siren. It wasn't. It was screaming. Multiple voices, coming from the residential area north of our position. By noon, 7 more people had arrived at our door. The Millers, an older couple from Oak Street who'd seen us entering the building. A teenager named Corey, who'd been separated from his parents during a panicked flight from the Riverside neighborhood. A woman named Sandra, who worked at the gas station and had locked herself in the bathroom when a customer attacked another customer with their teeth. Each person who arrived brought a piece of the larger picture. The infected were in the town now. Not 12 to 40? More, many more. They'd come from the north in the night, drawn along the river corridor, and fanned out into residential areas at dawn. The police were overwhelmed. Sandra had heard gunshots near the station. The military presence at the school had gone silent. I tried calling Dr. Okafor. No answer. Tried twice more over the next hour. Nothing. We were 12 people in a concrete building, watching through narrow windows as the town we'd all lived in began to die around us. The worst part wasn't the fear. The worst part was the sound. Harlan Falls was a quiet town. I'd loved that about it. Now it produced a soundtrack of breaking glass, distant screams, car alarms, and underneath it all, a low moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, the collective voice of the infected, calling to each other or to nothing. Saturday afternoon brought the hardest decision of the first day. At 2 p.m., a car pulled into the parking lot behind our building. Moving fast, swerving, its rear window shattered. It skidded to a stop near the loading dock. I watched from the roof as 2 people emerged, a man and a woman, both running. Behind them, 4 figures emerged from the tree line at the lot's edge, moving with that distinctive lurching gait. Reggie, I called. Loading dock. Survivors incoming with 4 infected in pursuit. Reggie was beside me in seconds, rifle up. He assessed the distance, the angle, the backdrop. I can drop them. Clear shots. Do it. 3 cracks from the rifle. 3 of the 4 figures went down. The 4th stumbled, changed direction. Reggie's 4th shot caught it in the head. It fell like its strings were cut. Below, Elena had opened the loading dock gate. The 2 survivors stumbled inside. The gate came down. I heard Elena's voice, calm, professional, asking about injuries. about exposure. I went downstairs. The new arrivals were both in their 30s. The man was white, red-haired, wearing a police uniform with a name tag, Bennett. The woman was black, fit, wearing scrubs. They were breathing hard, wide-eyed, but intact. Officer Derek Bennett and Dr. Aisha Williams, a cop and an ER doctor. In that moment, they felt like reinforcements sent by a universe that hadn't completely abandoned us. Bennett spoke first, once his breathing steadied. The station's gone. Overrun about an hour ago. 6 officers dead. I got out through the back, found Dr. Williams at the clinic. She was barricaded in an exam room. Aisha's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. The clinic was taking patients this morning. People with bites, scratches. We didn't know what would happen. 2 of them turned in our waiting room, just seized, went rigid, then attacked. Right there in the chairs. How fast? Miguel asked. He'd come downstairs, his biology teacher's mind already working. From bite to turn. The first one was bitten around 7 a.m. Turned at approximately 10:30. 3.5 hours. Aisha looked at her own hands. We'd treated it like a wound. Cleaned it, bandaged it, sent him to wait for his tetanus booster. 3.5 hours. The number embedded itself in my brain like a splinter. 3.5 hours between human and hunter. Between a person you could reason with and a thing that wanted to tear you apart. Bennett took inventory of our situation with the trained eye of a law enforcement officer. 12 civilians, 1 cop, 1 doctor. Limited firearms. Reggie's rifles, Bennett's service weapon with 2 spare magazines. The building was solid, but not designed for siege. Water came from municipal supply, which meant it depended on pumping stations that no one was operating anymore. How long on the water? Bennett asked me. The roof tank holds about 2,000 gallons. After that, we'd need an alternative source. Weeks then, at least for drinking. What about power? Backup generator in the basement, diesel. We have maybe 48 hours of fuel if we run it conservatively. Bennett nodded. Okay, defensible, supplied. Sustainable for a week minimum. Better than most options right now. He paused. But we need to talk about extraction. There's no cavalry coming, people. I was on the radio until the station fell. State police are pulling back to a perimeter around Birmingham. National Guard is being deployed, but they're prioritizing population centers. A town of 6,000? He shook his head. We're below the line. Below the line. A phrase that meant we weren't important enough to save quickly. That rescue was theoretical, distant, contingent on factors beyond our control. Keisha, still holding Maya, spoke from the corner where she'd been silent for hours. How far is Birmingham? 65 miles, I said. Can we drive it? Bennett and I exchanged a look. Could we? In theory. Route 9 south to Centerville, then Highway 5 north to Birmingham. 100 miles of road through territory that might or might not be passable. We don't know what's between here and there, I said. Not yet. Let's survive tonight first. Saturday night was the longest of my life. I say that with the full understanding that longer nights would follow. Nights of running, nights of loss, nights when dawn felt like a myth. But that first night under siege, with 12 people huddled in a government building while the world ended outside, had a particular quality of terror that I've never been able to match. We killed the lights at sundown. Reggie and Bennett had agreed. Any illumination visible from outside would draw them. We kept 1 small battery lantern in the interior break room, angled away from windows. Everything else went dark. The sound started around 9 p.m., scraping along the exterior walls. Footsteps in the parking lot. Not walking, not running, but that shuffling, irregular rhythm. Then testing, hands on the steel door, not pounding, pressing, feeling for give, for weakness. Maya began to cry. Keisha muffled it against her shoulder, humming, but the child was terrified and hungry and beyond comfort. The sound carried. Through the walls, through the windows we'd covered with paper and cardboard. The pressing on the door intensified. Multiple points now, not just the main entrance, but the loading dock gate. The windows on the ground floor. They'd heard her. Jonah took Maya from Keisha and carried her to the furthest interior point. A supply closet in the center of the building, surrounded by walls on all sides. He sat with her in the dark, singing softly, his hand over her mouth when she tried to cry louder. I could see his face in the dim emergency exit light. A father learning in real time that love requires things you never imagined. The testing continued for an hour, then stopped. Not gradually, abruptly. One moment the building was surrounded by probing, searching pressure, and the next, silence. Complete and sudden, as if something had called them away. Reggie crawled to a ground floor window and peeled back the cardboard an inch. He stayed there for several minutes, then came back. They've moved east, maybe 20 of them in a loose group, heading toward the commercial district. Drawn by something? Bennett asked. Must be. Car alarm going off somewhere over there. Can barely hear it. Sound. They followed sound. We'd known this intellectually, but now we'd experienced it viscerally. Maya's crying had brought them, and a louder stimulus elsewhere had pulled them away. We were alive because of a car alarm. Elena sat beside me on the floor, her back against the wall. In the near darkness, her voice was barely above a breath. Marcus, this isn't survivable long term. You know that. I did know it. Our building was strong, our supplies adequate for now. But we were a fixed point in a landscape that was filling with predators. Every day would bring more infected from upstream, from the surrounding countryside, drawn toward the town by its infrastructure, its lights, its sounds, its density of potential prey. We need to move, I agreed, but smart, planned, not a panicked flight. When? Tomorrow. We scout Route 9 south. If the road's clear, we convoy. All of us. And if it's not clear? I didn't answer because the honest answer was, then we try something else. And something else after that. Until we find a way, or we don't. That's what survival had become. Not a plan, but a series of attempts, each one gambling against odds we couldn't calculate. Aisha was treating the group by lantern light in the break room. Corey, the teenager, had developed a tremor in his hands, not injury, fear, pure psychological overload. She sat with him, spoke to him in low, measured tones, told him about the physiology of adrenaline, about how his body was responding normally to abnormal circumstances. She gave him a task, organizing the medical supplies, something concrete for his hands to do. I watched her work and understood something about our group's survival calculus. 12 people wasn't just 12 mouths to feed. It was 12 sets of skills, 12 psychological loads, 12 potential breaking points. Managing the group was as critical as managing the infected outside. I took the 3 a.m. watch again. This time, the tree lines were empty. The town glowed faintly in the distance. Fires, plural, burning unchecked. Nobody was fighting them anymore. Harlan Falls was consuming itself. Sunday morning, day 0, though we didn't know it yet. We'd later call it day 0 because it was the last day Harlan Falls held any living population. After Sunday, the town belonged entirely to the dead and the infected. I woke at first light to find Bennett already on the roof, scanning with binoculars. He'd volunteered for an extra watch shift after I'd collapsed from exhaustion at 5 a.m. 3 hours of sleep felt like minutes. What do you see? Route 9 visible for about a mile south. 2 abandoned vehicles that I can spot. One in the median, one on the shoulder. No movement on the road itself. But the intersection at Oak and Main has a cluster. 8, maybe 10. They're just standing there, not moving. Dormant? Looks like it. Okafor mentioned that, right? Low stimulus, they conserve energy. She had mentioned it. In the absence of stimuli, the infected entered a standing rest state. Eyes open, upright, but functionally inactive until something triggered their predatory response. Walking past them quietly might be possible. Driving past them, with engines and tire noise, would not. We gathered everyone in the break room for a council. I'd never been a leader in any formal sense. My authority came from being the one with the most information and the property we were sheltering in. But people looked at me when decisions needed making, and I accepted that weight because someone had to carry it. "We're leaving today," I said. "Route 9 south, 2 vehicles. My truck takes 6 in the cab and bed. Reggie's truck takes the rest. Bennett rides shotgun with me. Reggie leads." Questions came fast. Where exactly are we going? How do we handle blocked roads? What about the cluster at the intersection? Centerville first, 30 miles. If the evacuation center is still operational, we stop there. If not, we continue to Birmingham along Highway 5. I turned to Bennett. "The cluster at Oak and Main. Is there a bypass?" He thought. Miller Road cuts behind the lumber yard and connects to Route 9 about a quarter-mile south of the intersection. Residential street. Narrow, but passable. That's our route. We leave in 20 minutes. Everyone packs only what they can carry in one hand. Move quickly and quietly. No slamming doors, no raised voices. The preparation had a frantic efficiency. Elena loaded food and water into duffel bags. Aisha packed her medical kit, the clinic supplies she'd grabbed during her escape. Reggie distributed his firearms. 1 rifle for Bennett, his hunting shotgun for himself, a handgun he pressed into my palm. "You know how to use it?" "My father taught me. I haven't fired one in 12 years. Point and pull. Don't hesitate. Don't aim for limbs." I put the gun in my belt and felt its weight like a moral transformation. I'd never carried a weapon. I'd been a civil engineer. I'd designed drainage systems and reviewed construction permits. Now, I was armed, preparing to drive through a dead town, surrounded by things that hunted by sound. We loaded the vehicles in the underground parking structure beneath the building. One advantage of government architecture I'd never appreciated until now. The structure's entrance opened onto a side street perpendicular to the main road, giving us a straight shot to Miller Road without crossing the Oak and Main intersection. I did a final head count. 12 people, including Maya, who was mercifully calm. Keisha had given her the last of a children's Benadryl from Aisha's kit, and the child dozed against her mother's chest. 12 people I now felt responsible for in a way that sat heavy on my spine. "Keep noise to minimum," I said as we climbed into the trucks. "Windows up. If we encounter blocked road, do not exit vehicles unless absolutely necessary. Follow Reggie's lead. If he stops, you stop. If he accelerates, you accelerate." I turned the key. The engine came to life, loud, shockingly loud in the morning stillness. Reggie pulled forward. I followed. The parking structure gate opened, and we emerged into Sunday morning sunlight in a town that no longer belonged to us. Miller Road was clear. I exhaled for the first time in 40 seconds as we rounded the lumber yard and the residential street stretched before us. Empty, silent, normal looking, except for the doors standing open on two houses and a garden hose still running in a front yard, water pooling across the sidewalk and into the gutter. Reggie's truck ahead maintained 25 miles per hour. Slow enough to be quiet, fast enough to cover ground. I matched his speed exactly. In my rearview mirror, I could see Elena in the back seat, her eyes scanning the sides of the road with the intensity of someone who understood that what you didn't see could kill you faster than what you did. Bennett sat beside me, service weapon in his lap, head on a swivel. In the truck bed, behind the cab, Jonah lay flat with Maya against his chest, covered by a tarp. It was the only way to bring them. The bed was our overflow space, and exposed passengers would be both vulnerable and visible. We hit Route 9 at the Miller Road junction without incident. The highway opened up. 2 lanes in each direction, median strip, clear sight lines. For the first half mile, I allowed myself to believe we'd made it, that the hard part was behind us. Then Reggie's brake lights flared. Ahead, maybe 300 yards, the road was obstructed. Not by a random accident, by a deliberate barricade. Vehicles arranged nose to tail across both southbound lanes. Behind them, I could see movement. People. Living people with weapons. Reggie stopped. I stopped behind him. We sat for 10 seconds, assessing. A man walked forward from the barricade. Tall, sunburned, carrying a shotgun openly. He approached Reggie's window. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I watched body language. Reggie was calm. The man was assertive. Wide stance, gun not aimed, but not lowered. After 2 minutes, Reggie's door opened. He stepped out, hands visible, and walked back to my truck. I rolled down my window. "Militia," he said quietly. "Local boys. They've sealed the road. Say they're protecting Centerville from what's coming out of Harlan Falls." "They won't let us through?" "They're deciding. Their leader wants to inspect our people, check for bites." I looked at Bennett. He shrugged. His uniform might help or hurt, depending on these people's relationship with authority. "We do it," I said. "We have nothing to hide." I was wrong. Not about us. About what the inspection would reveal about them. We pulled forward to the barricade at their direction. 11 adults and 1 child climbed out of 2 trucks and stood in the morning sun while 4 armed men inspected us like cattle at auction. They checked arms, necks, torsos, told people to lift shirts, looked in mouths. One man, young, barely 20, with scared eyes and an AR-15 he held like it might bite him, checked Corey roughly, grabbing the teenager's arm hard enough to bruise. "Hey," I said. "Easy. He's a kid." The leader, the sunburned man, who identified himself as Carl, turned to me. "Can't be too careful. We let 2 cars through yesterday, and one of them had a bitten passenger. Turned in the middle of the Centerville shelter. Killed 3 people before they put him down." That information hit our group like cold water. The shelter we'd been heading toward had been compromised. "Is Centerville still operational?" I asked. Carl shook his head. "Partially. They've consolidated to the high school gymnasium. But it's crowded. Resources are thin and trust is gone. People are scared." He looked at our group, 12 faces, ranging from terrified to exhausted. "I'll let you through. But my advice, don't stop in Centerville. Keep going south. Get to Birmingham if you can." He moved a truck, opened a gap. Reggie pulled through first, then me. As we passed, I looked at Carl's face and saw something that disturbed me more than fear. I saw a man who'd already decided that the rules of civilization were suggestions. and that the shotgun in his hands was the only law that mattered anymore. We didn't stop in Centerville. We drove through at speed, and what we saw confirmed Carl's warning. The town was fractured, some streets barricaded like Carl's roadblock, others abandoned. The high school parking lot held hundreds of vehicles and a crowd of displaced people visible even at distance. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Armed figures patrolled a perimeter fence that hadn't existed a week ago. It looked less like a shelter and more like the first draft of a desperate new society being written in real time. Route 9 merged with Highway 5 north outside Centerville, toward Birmingham, toward whatever remained of institutional civilization. Hospitals, military bases, government. The road was busier here, other evacuees heading the same direction. We joined a loose convoy of civilian vehicles, all moving at cautious speed, all maintaining suspicious distance from each other. For 20 miles, things were almost normal. Highway driving, engine sounds, the banality of asphalt and lane markings. I let my grip on the steering wheel relax slightly. Elena leaned back in her seat. Even Bennett's posture eased marginally. Then the highway crested a hill, and we saw what was ahead. A checkpoint. Massive. Military vehicles, concrete barriers, razor wire. National Guard personnel with automatic weapons. A processing line of vehicles stretched back at least a mile. People being checked, documented, directed. Order, structure, safety. I felt something release in my chest. A tension I'd been holding since Monday, since the first dead deer in the current. We'd made it. The system hadn't completely failed. Someone was still running things. We reached the checkpoint at 2 p.m. after an hour in line. A soldier approached my window, young, professional, exhausted. "How many in your vehicle, sir?" "6 total. 2 trucks traveling together. 12 people, including a child." "Any injuries? Any bites or scratches from infected individuals?" "No, we're clean. All of us." He checked a tablet, scanned something, directed us to a processing lane. We pulled forward, parked where indicated, and stepped out into a scene of organized chaos. Hundreds of vehicles, thousands of people. Tents, portable toilets, water stations. A field hospital in a white tent complex. National Guard soldiers everywhere, their faces blank with the fatigue of continuous crisis operation. They processed us efficiently. Names, identification, medical screening. Aisha's credentials earned her immediate attention. A captain pulled her aside, asking about her experience, her willingness to work at the field hospital. She agreed without hesitation. Purpose. Something to do besides be afraid. Bennett found his people, law enforcement officers from across the region, coordinating with military personnel. He shook my hand before he left. "You kept those people alive, Marcus. Don't forget that." I didn't feel like I'd kept anyone alive. I felt like luck and concrete walls and a man with a rifle had kept us alive. But I took his words and stored them somewhere I might need them later. Our group dispersed into the system. Jonah, Keisha, and Maya were directed to a family tent. The Millers to an elderly care section. Corey was placed with a group of unaccompanied minors. Sandra from the gas station simply walked into the crowd and disappeared. I never saw her again. That left 4, Elena, Miguel, Reggie, and me, the original kitchen table council. We stood in the shadow of a military truck and looked at each other. "What now?" Elena asked. "We rest," I said. "We eat. We figure out what happens next." But even as I said it, I knew. Rest was temporary. This checkpoint was a way station, not a destination. The infection corridor was still moving south. The line on the map that separated safety from collapse was not fixed. It was being pushed backward day by day, mile by mile. We had outrun it for now. But the river still flowed. And downstream, always downstream, the things it carried would arrive. That night, I slept on a cot, in a military tent surrounded by strangers. I dreamed of brown water. I dreamed of silence where birds should sing. I dreamed of something standing at a tree line, turning slowly toward the sound of my breathing. The checkpoint held for 9 days. I know that number precisely because I marked each morning on a piece of cardboard I kept beside my cot. A habit born from the need to maintain temporal orientation. When every day is crisis, when routine dissolves, you lose track of time faster than you'd believe possible. So I marked mornings. 9 of them, each one beginning with the same sounds. Diesel generators, distant helicopters, the murmur of thousands of displaced people waking into the same nightmare they'd slept through. Elena and Miguel worked the supply distribution tent. Reggie volunteered for perimeter security. His shooting skills and military background made him immediately useful. I ended up in an unlikely role: civil infrastructure consultant for the checkpoint's engineering team. They needed someone who understood water systems, drainage, the capacity of temporary structures. I'd spent my career doing exactly that. For 9 days, we rebuilt something resembling life. Not normal life. Nothing about military tents and rationed food and the distant crack of gunfire on the perimeter was normal, but a structure. Shifts, duties, meals, sleep. The skeleton of society wrapped around the raw fear that permeated everything. I saw Dr. Okafor on day 4. She appeared at the medical tent, thinner, with a bandage on her left hand. She spotted me across the gravel walkway and came over. Marcus. She used my first name again, and it carried a different weight now, not professional distance, something closer to camaraderie. We'd survived the same disaster. Your hand. Glass. During the evacuation of the school. They breached the perimeter at approximately 4 a.m. Saturday. We lost 2 team members. I absorbed that. The military setup at the elementary school, their command post, their preparation. Overwhelmed in a single night. How many? I asked. I meant the infected, the total. Our current estimate for the Cahaba corridor, from its source in the Appalachian foothills to the Birmingham metro area, is approximately 12,000 infected individuals. The original source appears to be a research facility in eastern Tennessee, whose containment failed approximately 3 weeks before the first river evidence appeared in your area. 12,000, a number too large to hold emotionally. I let it pass through me like the river current. Is there a cure, a treatment? No. The protein compound, we're calling it PRX7, restructures neural architecture irreversibly. Once the transformation completes, the original personality, memory, and higher function are permanently destroyed. The infected are not recoverable, Marcus. They're casualties we haven't buried yet. That phrase stayed with me. Casualties we haven't buried yet. A new category of human existence, alive but irrecoverable. Moving but empty. The body continuing after the person inside had already died. On day 6, the perimeter was tested for the first time. A group of approximately 30 infected approached from the northeast, drawn by the noise and light of our encampment. The military response was swift and clinical. Gunfire lasted 7 minutes. 30 bodies on the ground. No casualties on our side. But it exposed a truth that the commanders understood, even if they didn't say it publicly. We were a lighthouse in the dark. Every sound we made, Every generator we ran, every vehicle that moved in or out was a beacon. The infected would keep coming, in larger numbers, drawn from greater distances. On day 8, the announcement came over the PA system. Orderly relocation to Birmingham proper, a fortified safe zone centered on the University of Alabama at Birmingham campus. Military escort, staged departure over 48 hours, beginning the following morning. That night, lying on my cot, I felt the same restlessness I'd felt on my porch in Harlan Falls. The feeling of a temporary place about to end. The feeling of another move, another flight, another leg in a journey I hadn't chosen and couldn't end. Elena's voice came from the next cot. "You awake?" "Always." "We're going to be okay, Marcus." I wanted to believe her. I chose to believe her, which is a different thing, an act of will rather than evidence. But in that darkness, surrounded by breathing strangers, it was enough. The convoy to Birmingham departed at 0600 on what I marked as day 10 on my cardboard calendar. 43 days since the first dead deer in the river. We traveled in military trucks, canvas-covered, bench-seated, packed tight with 60 people per vehicle. The intimacy was extreme. Strangers pressed against strangers, children on laps, the smell of unwashed bodies, and fear sweat in an enclosed space. I sat between Elena and an elderly man named Herbert, who told me, unprompted, about his 37 years as a postal carrier in Centerville. He talked continuously about routes, about dogs, about holiday packages. I understood that the talking was his mechanism, his way of papering over the terror with normalcy. I listened without interrupting. Reggie was in a different truck. His perimeter security role had placed him with the military escorts. Miguel rode in a vehicle behind ours. Our group was scattered by logistics, and that separation felt wrong. Vulnerable, like a body losing coordination. The drive should have taken 90 minutes. It took 6 hours. Detours around blocked roads, stops for checkpoint clearances. One extended halt when a group of infected appeared on the highway, and the military escort engaged them from the vehicles. We heard the gunfire, muffled by canvas. Felt the truck vibrate with its sharpness. Maya cried. Other children cried. Adults held silence like breath held underwater. When we finally arrived at the Birmingham safe zone, I understood the scale of what had happened. The UAB campus had been transformed into a walled compound. Jersey barriers, concertina wire, sandbagged positions, watchtowers improvised from scaffolding. Inside, thousands of people. A city within a city, organized by sector, managed by military command structure with civilian cooperation. They assigned us housing, Elena, Miguel, and me in the same dormitory floor. Reggie was billeted with security forces in a separate building. We'd see him at meals, at briefings. But our 4-person unit was being dissolved by the demands of a larger system. I reported to the infrastructure division on my first morning. They needed engineers desperately. The safe zone's water came from the Birmingham municipal system, which still functioned but required maintenance and monitoring. Sewage, drainage, power distribution, all the invisible systems that made human concentration possible. My skills were valuable in a way they'd never been in peacetime. Survival had made civil engineering into a heroic profession. Weeks passed. I lose precise count here despite my cardboard calendar. The marks blurred together, each day the same rhythm of work, rest, briefings, meals. The safe zone held. The military maintained the perimeter. The infected accumulated outside but couldn't breach the fortifications. News came in fragments. The outbreak had spread beyond the initial Appalachian corridor. Other states, other rivers. The Mississippi was now carrying the pathogen. Whole river communities from Minnesota to Louisiana affected. Federal response was fragmented, overwhelmed, making triage decisions about which populations to save and which to abandon. We were inside the line. We were being saved. Millions of others were not. Elena found me one evening on the dormitory roof, a place I'd taken to visiting at sunset, watching the Birmingham skyline against fading light. Smoke rose from distant fires on the outskirts, but the campus itself was calm, organized, alive. "I got a message from my mother," she said. "She's in the Houston safe zone. They're okay." "Good. That's good." Miguel wants to stay on the research team. They're working on understanding PRX7. He thinks... She paused. He thinks they'll find something. A way to neutralize it in the waterways, at least. Maybe. Marcus. She sat beside me on the roof's edge. "You've been quiet. Quieter than your usual quiet." "I'm thinking about the river." "Our river?" "All of them. Every river that carried this downstream. Every town that got the same warnings we did. Every town that didn't listen or listened too late." She didn't respond. We watched the sky darken together, and I thought about water, about how it connects everything, carries everything, reveals everything, how the thing that gives life can carry death just as easily. On day 43, by my count on the cardboard, I sat in a debriefing room in the UAB administration building and told a military intelligence officer everything I've told you. Every detail, from the first dead deer to the last sunset I watched from the dormitory roof. She recorded it, typed notes, asked clarifying questions, with the practiced neutrality of someone who'd heard dozens of these accounts. "Mr. Dunhill, in your professional assessment, was there anything that could have been done differently at the municipal level that might have changed the outcome for Harlan Falls?" I thought about the question for a long time. Earlier closure of the river. Immediate mandatory evacuation when the tissue samples came back. Upstream reconnaissance as soon as the animal kills were reported. I paused. But the real failure wasn't local. The real failure was that a research facility in Tennessee lost containment of something unprecedented, and the response infrastructure didn't activate quickly enough to warn communities downstream. She nodded, typed, didn't editorialize. "Is there anything else you'd like on the record?" I thought about Dan Oberlin, who was among the missing, about Deputy Marsh, who'd never sent anyone to check the trails, about Mrs. Campanella, who I'd put on a bus to Centerville. Had she survived when the shelter was compromised? I didn't know. I might never know. "The river told us," I said. "For 6 days, it told us something was wrong. We had the evidence. Dead animals, tissue samples, protein markers, missing birds, a witness account of an infected individual. 6 days of warnings, and we couldn't translate them into action fast enough because our systems aren't designed for warnings that don't fit into existing categories." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we had protocols for chemical spills, for floods, for contamination events. We didn't have a protocol for the river is delivering evidence of an unknown pathogen that turns humans into predators. There was no box to check, no form to fill out, no chain of command designed for something without precedent." She wrote that down. I hoped someone would read it. I hoped the failure would be instructive rather than merely archived. After the debriefing, I walked across campus to the cafeteria where our group took evening meals. Elena and Miguel were there, along with Reggie, who'd gotten leave from his security rotation. We sat together, the 4 of us who'd started at my kitchen table on that Thursday night, planning for something we didn't yet understand. Reggie looked healthier than he had in Harlan Falls. Purpose suited him. Miguel was energized by his research work, hopeful, even, in a cautious way. Elena was steady as always, her calm a foundation the rest of us leaned against. "I heard from Aisha today," she said. "She's running the field hospital's triage unit now. Full authority." "Bennett?" "Regional Law Enforcement Coordination. He's basically rebuilding a police force from scratch." Our group had dispersed into the machinery of survival and found purpose within it. This was, I thought, how humans persisted through catastrophe. Not through individual heroism, but through the willingness to perform necessary functions, to be useful, to contribute to something larger than personal survival. I thought about Harlan Falls, about my house on the river, about the monitoring station where Elena and I had first watched the current carry its warnings, about the Water Authority building where 12 people had sheltered for one night while the world broke apart around them. The river was still flowing. It would flow forever, regardless of what it carried. Water had no morality, no intention. It moved because gravity demanded it, and everything in its path either adapted or was swept away. We'd been swept away, but we'd survived the current. That night, for the first time since the outbreak began, I slept without dreaming of brown water. I dreamed instead of silence, the peaceful kind, the kind that means everything dangerous has passed, and what remains is only stillness and breathing, and the distant sound of life continuing despite everything that tried to end it. I still count days. It's been over 200 now since that first Monday at the monitoring station. The Birmingham safe zone has stabilized into something approaching permanence. A fortified city within a city, growing, organizing, becoming the seed of whatever comes next. I work water systems, the same work I did before, but now with the understanding that infrastructure isn't bureaucratic tedium. It's the invisible scaffolding that makes human community possible. Every pipe I maintain, every filtration system I monitor, is an act of faith that tomorrow will require clean water, that people will be alive to drink it. Elena tells me I've changed. Quieter, more deliberate. She says I watch the water differently now, not with the casual familiarity of a man who knew his river, but with the vigilance of someone who understands that water speaks before disaster arrives. She's right. I listen to rivers now. I listen to the things they carry. The Cahaba still flows south through what was Harlan Falls. Someday, perhaps, people will return there. Rebuild. Trust the water again. I'll never trust a river the same way. But I'll always listen when one tries to tell me something.